Made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
Just 4 days ago, Barbados celebrated its 56th year of independence and its first anniversary of being a parliamentary republic. The country is in the process of developing a new constitution with hearings set for ordinary Barbadians to have an input. Now, over the past 56 years, the media have, well, been keeping a watchful eye. Indeed, there have been run-ins with various administrations. So the question remains, did the media do its job over the years, or did it censor itself in order to operate in a small society? This is what we're discussing this evening. Welcome to The People's Business. I am TESHIA HINDS. Now, there are some who look at our northern neighbor, the United States, and point a finger at local journalism saying, you're not doing enough. We want to see a North American standard. You need to hold people's feet to the fire. You need to do more in-depth journalism. You need to do more investigative journalism. So as we move into tonight's topic, which is the role of journalism in our new republic, we have an esteemed panel joining us to discuss exactly what we're looking at and perhaps help to chart a new path forward. Emanuel Joseph is here with us. He's General Secretary as well as First Vice President of the Association of Caribbean Media Workers. Well, he's General Secretary of the Barbados Association of Journalists and Media Workers, rather. Welcome to you. Good to have you with us. Also here is Ryan Broome, who is a broadcast journalist here at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. We have Kerrie Gooding, who's with Loop News, and she is the country content manager there. And Colville Mounsey, who is with The Nation News, and he is senior multimedia journalist, as well as Peter Wickham, who is an analyst and talk show host. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening to all of you.
Thanks for having us.
It's going to be an interesting discussion, a bigger panel than usual, but we have lots to discuss in the next hour. And of course, we will encourage you to come in with your questions and comments as well. To paraphrase Austrian journalist Joachim Riedel, journalism is one of the cornerstones of democracy, indispensable in a free society. We'll be right back as we jump into this evening's topic right here on The People's Business. Stay with us. Welcome back to this evening's presentation. We're going to jump right into the topic and start with you, Emanuel. Now, wearing your hat as General Secretary of BARJAM, give us an overview of what you think, from where you sit, how you think the media in Barbados has performed over the last 56 years. If you can sum it up for us in a few sentences, and then move into what you think we need to change.
Okay. So I would say that we've done our job within the limited environment that we are allowed to operate. I think that most journalists have been very committed to their tasks. But of course, in a small society and over those years, very little has changed in respect of how far we are able to go. Now, we know, and it's no secret, that in a small society like Barbados, um, there are influence, there are people who influence the media, there are people who interfere with the media. We have political interference. We have corporate interference. Means some people would use the word euphemism, influence. But I think that if there's a problem and you do not admit there's a problem, then you won't be able to solve the problem. So I know for a fact that over the years there have been political interference, and therefore reporters, journalists become a little apprehensive to go beyond what they're supposed to go beyond. That is when people talk about you should be more investigative and all that. Because some people tell you, I have a mortgage to pay. But coming back to the meat of the matter is that we have done what we could do within the capacity and the environment in which we are allowed to operate. Because, for example, there are gatekeepers whereby you would write a story about a particular person, and this has happened over the years. And depending on who the person is, you get a phone call and the story comes to an end. So it does not see the light of day. So in instances where we have to make people accountable and expose the corruption or expose the wrongdoings that are occurring in our society in high places, you do not know that we've actually been there. We've actually sought to investigate it, but it does not get very far. In fact, it does not see the light of day at all. So I think that what we need to do is something that I've been calling for a long time. Under the last administration, we've been calling for a Freedom of Information Act. There is a Freedom of Information Act in draft right now, and it is before the present government. But the present government has promised to enact legislation, freedom of information. But we are into a second term now, and we are still to see that happening. So where we need to go from here, in the new constitution, we need to have that we need to have that bill enacted. It needs to come before Parliament before the end of this term.
All right.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, continue, Emanuel. Finish your point.
So that is what I would like to see going forward. That's just one of the things I would like to see going forward in the new republic.
All right, now I'm going to go to Peter, because Peter, I read a piece that you did titled Challenges to Media Freedom in the Caribbean Sub-Region, and it's not a very long piece, but it is very comprehensive in really capturing all of what Emanuel talked about and then some. You refer to small islands having lacking critical mass to really assure media freedom completely. You talk about journalism practiced almost completely by the state because of reasons that he talked about, the state being a lot of the times the only place that can really provide the level of salaries that they want. And you talk a bit about market-driven media freedom, referencing some of the bigger Caribbean countries, Trinidad and Jamaica, and so on. So share with us your view then, based on what Emanuel has put on the table. Do you think that legislation will be enough?
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks for inviting me to participate in the conversation. And I disagree with Emmanuel. There's nothing wrong with the Freedom of Information Act, and I think we need one, and we should press government to make the Freedom of Information Act a reality. But to suggest that there's a constitutional impediment to good journalism being practiced in Barbados is something that I fundamentally disagree with. I think there are market realities in Barbados, in the OECS, and the article was really more about the sub-region, which is the OECS and Barbados. And the fact is that we don't have a large active media space. When you started the conversation, you were talking about the United States of America and the fact that good journalism is practiced there largely because you have independence that is created by virtue of the fact you have an organization like CNN, which is completely independent. They make their own money, they pay good salaries, and they can essentially pay a journalist to sit on stories for several weeks and months if necessary. In the BBC, they have an interesting relationship, but still there's a freedom to pursue issues like Panorama does on a regular basis. But we don't have that in the Caribbean. We don't have that largely because a lot of the journalists who practice outside of government are looking to get inside of government because they're better paid. And a lot of them who practice journalism outside of government may very well be happier working as a public relations person in some agency or whatnot because the salary levels are generally low. And in that environment, you have the CNN expectations, but you have a reality of an environment in which an editor is sitting on top of you and saying, you know, they expect you to produce 2 or 3 stories, and you don't really have the time to do the research. So the issue is not, for me, the freedom of information, making that information available. It's also the fact that journalists need to have the time to do the research and also the capacity to do the research in terms of their training, their exposure, the qualifications. And, you know, we need to move away from a situation where really only in Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica do you have a large commercial space in which media houses can be paid for advertising and so on to generate CNN style type journalism, as distinct from places like us in the Caribbean, where the media pie is so small, the amount of money that the media shares. You basically find that you have media houses scrambling for a few dollars and, you know, journalists not being well paid. And as a result, the cream is normally taken by agencies that can afford to retain that level of talent. So I think that that's really where the issue is more critical, and less about the fact that, you know, you have legislative impediments to people practicing good journalism. And I think in that article, that's what I was really trying to get at. We have a problem in Barbados, but the problem in the OECS, I think, is considerably worse because the space is smaller. And as a result, the journalistic arrangements are even more challenging. You have journalism being practiced by people. You have one person who is producing news and sports and music and everything. In some instances, media houses being run into somebody's bedroom. And that is the nature of the deal in some of the OECS countries. It's pretty bad. So that to me is the bigger challenge.
Colville, now let's go to print media because over the years we've seen a lot of the really biting stories or investigative pieces being credited to print media in Barbados more so. How do you think you've performed in the grand scheme of things when it comes to doing these types of pieces, investigative pieces or in-depth pieces?
Well, I wouldn't want to self-assess per se, really. But if I may say, in terms of listening to both Peter and Emmanuel, the problem lies with a combination of the two. Yes, there are market-driven issues as well. And additionally, freedom of information. Information sometimes is not as forthcoming. And I think the media has performed remarkably well still, given some of the limitations in accessing information. For example, I mean, if you look at, if I may use one of my colleagues, Maria Bradshaw, her story on GIS, which pretty much sparked an entire revamping of juvenile justice system in Barbados. So we have made strides. We have continued to hold those that are supposed to be held accountable their feet to the fire. So I as I said, it is a combination of both market-driven forces and also and also getting information when you do need it, because there are gatekeepers. There are sometimes you do try to reach out to some sources, some public sources that should readily be providing information, and that information is very difficult to come by.
And Kerrie, we know that online media sources as mainstream media is very, very new, particularly in this part of the world. Talk to us about, the concept of coming to a people through, a channel like Loop News, which is entirely online.
Good night. Thank you for having me on the panel. I'm going to follow on from what Colville would have been saying. So I agree with him about it being a combination of the market-driven and the access to information. I think access to information is really one of the critical points that, we need to harp on when it comes to the journalism in Barbados. For example, so let me see how to say this. Sorry. It's like, you still have to be mindful of everything, as everybody was saying. I want to say that when it comes to access to information, just now, Emanuel was talking about the Freedom of Information Act. When you have a Freedom of Information Act, that's only one piece of legislation. The problem with it is that then persons have the right to refusal. And there are different grounds that you can refuse to give that information. So legislation alone cannot do it. It can't solve everything. That said, then on the other hand, I feel like we need to be a bit harder, or we need to put more things in place when it comes to how we access information. I feel like we should be able to go to certain places to access certain information, have different resources that we can always tap into. The same thing that Colville was talking about. You can go to somebody and the information is not freely given. That should never be the case for certain pieces of facts that we need to get. For example, if I need to get statistics like on divorce and I go and I write a letter to the registrar, for example, I need a time frame. I shouldn't have to wait a month or 2 months to get statistics. It's just, when it comes to the online world for us, everything is a bit faster paced. And yes, you're not always going to have a resource that can speak to you at the same time that you have an issue or you have a question, but there needs to be some practicality to it. A person might not get back to you the same time, which is hard in the online space, as I said, because for us, everything is so quick. But we need to have some checks and balances, and we need to have some strict measures put in place when it comes to accessing the information.
All right, Ryan. Yeah, for sure. Ryan, let's get you in. You've worked in print media, you've worked in broadcast media as well. Your take?
I want to agree and disagree with some of the comments so far, because the Freedom of Information Act is definitely important. I do have some colleagues even in other countries. I remember I did an investigative journalism course about 5 years ago in Jamaica, and during that course I was talking to some of my colleagues, and some of them were talking about the fact that yes, they have the act, but something like what Kerrie just said, sometimes people would give an excuse as to why even though they're supposed to give a reason why they don't give you information, sometimes they would delay you getting that information. But that being said, it's still important to you will eventually get it, and they're given a time frame to give you it. And I think that is important still. I like what we've been seeing here in terms of the Senate styled when we have the debates now in the House, where the public officers now have to come and give information. And the truth is, I would like to see a scenario where those officers, when we call on them, because there's not everything that a minister can give you. Sometimes you may hear a minister speaking and the minister will say something to the effect, well, I don't have those figures available. The truth is, a lot of those people who are in the pen, as they call it, when they go in Parliament, a lot of those people have the figures. But the way how our laws are structured now, some of them aren't allowed to, I think, engage in media directly. And that sometimes causes an information delay and sometimes an information frustration. And that's hard to deal with. But culturally, I think we having to stare at the elephant in the room and say that culturally a lot of things impact on the way how journalists do what they do. And this is me looking back over my almost 30 years in this field, in both print and broadcast, and to not address that and to look at it and say that it's there is to be dishonest, really. And I that's why I smile sometimes when I hear and I heard Peter talk about investigative journalism and you talk about investigative journalism, and I wonder sometimes, do you really want investigative journalism? Because as Emmanuel said, somebody's worried about their mortgage. I remember I got some information for a story when I was in print, and I got documents. It's just that the documents by themselves coming from nobody, or quote unquote nobody, give you this fall off the back of a truck kind of thing. You still need to have credibility at the end of the day. And the problem is that sometimes people who give you information aren't willing to stand behind that information because they're concerned about their jobs and their mortgages. So I think, given the cultural nuances that we exist in, small island culture and so on, I think that we have done pretty well under the circumstances. It's not to say that there hasn't been some element of quote unquote investigative journalism over the years, but you know, you have to kind of then kind of put that into context in terms of what are you talking about? Is it just government that we're talking about when we talk about such things? Or are we talking about things on the ground level, where like crime? And then the other thing that I want to mention really quickly is, and Peter alluded to this too, I'm known for business journalism, but I don't only do business journalism for CBC. I do other things. It's hard to specialize in areas and to give subject areas the kind of attention that you would like to, because the truth is we're not a CNN. We're not some of those big media entities in North America who have the resources. For example, you know, at CNN, you have reporters who do stories for the anchors and for the people who the actual on screen people who we never see. But in our case, we have to go out and we have to search because we don't have the resources to pay for 2 or 3 reporters and 2 or 3 and 4 editors to get things done in that way that you could give it the attention that it really needs. And so financing too is really an issue. And that's not just private, but that's also public as well, because we're a small island state, we're challenging times, you know, money is tight for everybody.
All right, quite a mouthful, and I think that we've given a good idea of the state of the republic, so to speak, in terms of journalism and a few of the challenges that we experience. Quite a lot of overlap based on what everybody has said. From me, over the years, it has seemed as though a lot of investigative pieces, once they hit the newspaper or they're on the air, we've seen some journalists being villainized as well. So, you know, that is something that I'd like to look at, and of course, look at charting a way forward when we come back. Stay with us. This evening, we're looking at the role of journalism. Quite a big panel with us. We're going to go directly back to you, Emanuel. You know, let's get into really what keeps the journalists in Barbados from doing all of these things. I know you mentioned the Freedom of Information Act. We talked about that being put in place, waiting on it to be put in place to be able to move forward with things. Peter disagreed in a manner of speaking. So how do we chart a way forward outside of just the Freedom of Information Act? What do you believe we can do to better serve our audiences?
Okay, before I go into that, I just want to say that the nature of this discussion do not allow you to say everything you want to say up front. So they were responding to what I was saying in trying to consume the time, capitalize on the time. I am not saying that's the only thing, the freedom of information. I mean, there's so many other things. But that said, we need in this country people with the will and the guts to who are involved in the media, that is the managers, the owners, for starters, to support the reporters in their quest as professionals in doing their job. Why I say that going forward, because again, we have to say in a small society, you have media owners or media managers who are friends, close friends of corporate business people and politicians, so that when you are moving forward in doing your job, then, as I said earlier, and I will say it again, you get a phone call. And then everything stops. But I would say going forward, we need a media literacy campaign so that people can get to appreciate the role of the media, what we really are up against, what our job is, what our role is. And our role is so critical, it impacts the everyday lives of people in so many different ways. So that going forward under a new republic, I would like to see more respect, more recognition and acceptance of the the media fraternity as a professional body, right? Just like all the other professions who are considered elite and so on. So we need that will. We need that people to actually accept us as that kind of profession. But at the same time, we ourselves need to show respect for ourselves. So there has to be some internal assessment and re-examination of ourselves so that we can help chart that way forward. And that's just some of the things that I would like to see in going forward.
Peter, I don't know if in recent times we've had a survey about how people generally feel about the media. But trust is a big part of being able to bring any story at all to the people whom you serve. So what are your thoughts on the way that we engage with our audiences and how they feel generally about mainstream media on island?
Yeah, I mean that's a very interesting question, and I agree with you that certainly in another space, ironically in Trinidad and Tobago, I frequently do surveys that raise issues such as media trust. The challenge, of course, in Trinidad and Tobago is that there is an environment that will pay for the research like that to be conducted. I think it would be great to know what the level of trust is in Barbados and how people trust one media host versus the other. But there is no such information that's being collected. And I tell you, that creates another problem because you have media surveys being thrown about as gospel when, no one really knows the origins, where they come from, who did them, if they were done at all. There's not a lot of information like that. And I think a big part of the problem is that as a researcher, I know that it's expensive to get this kind of data collected. And I would really trust the bona fides of an organization that sprouts information like that without actually giving details. But in another regard, I think that Barbadians do have a level of confidence in media. One of the good things of the COVID, if there can be such a thing, the COVID experience, is that it gave us the opportunity to assess information coming from different sources. We did a survey in Barbados and across the region looking at sources of information. And what we found was that the government sources and the medical sources were the most trusted in relation to that particular issue. Now, that information was golden because it helped us to understand what people were believing and were comfortable with and what they were really rejecting. there was a lot of excitement over social media sources. And what we found was that in a lot of instances, people were not prepared to accept a lot of the stuff that was there, and they found the other sources a lot more reliable. It's interesting. Some time ago, in another space, we were actually doing, the call-in shows as assessing them as a reliable source of information. And I do host a call-in program, but I also appreciate that a lot of people dismiss, a lot of the stuff that they hear on those sources because they don't know that it's reliable. There really needs to be a proper assessment of what is reliable and what is unreliable. I think that Barbadians do trust as I said, the government sources. But there's also a concern in many instances that the government sources are tainted in some instances by propaganda. And let's be real, that there's a feeling that there's some level of propagandization in relation to government sources of information, and the belief that those other sources could in many ways be more genuine. But I've also seen for myself that a lot of those sources are also tainted because, you have competing agendas. And while you may not have a political agenda on one hand, you may have another type of agenda that may creep in and may be very well influenced in a non-governmental source. And that is also something that we need to be wary about. But, in the context of a large, active, bustling commercial environment, as would be the case in the United States of America, there's balance. And the balance comes from the fact that you have a CNN, you have a Fox, and then you have several other independent sources in there which, balance out the whole equation and give you a proper perspective in relation to what's happening.
Very interesting. Large, bustling commercial environment definitely is something that's needed. And in the context of a BBC model where they take commercialization off the table altogether, with the view that the company can fully pursue whatever they're going after without that commercial influence is something else that we can look at. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I understand we have a caller on the line. Good evening. Welcome.
Hello? You hear me?
Good evening, sir. We are.
Yes,
Go right
yes,
ahead.
Good evening. I have a problem with the print media in this country. And the print media in this country is nearly national newspaper. I want to
We'll open that to the floor if there's anyone who would like to respond.
Well, I think I am duty bound to respond to some degree, given the fact that he would have mentioned the Nation newspaper. However, that's a rather subjective point of view in terms of what is important or what should the priority of importance in terms of publications, in terms of the chronology of stories. I think sometimes people have a very provincial approach, and I've seen it in terms of what they want to see appear in the papers, or even asked at press conferences. I've seen it based on the comments in press conferences. Some people would, you're trying to deal with national issues at a time, and someone would want to have a question asked about when I'm going to get my tax returns, or when I'm going to get my pension checks, or my pension is late. Those are provincial issues that are best left for a different forum. And basically, at the end of the day, it comes down to a judgment call of what is in what would be of most greatest public interest when the editors make their choice and selection for articles that run from front to back.
And I dare say
Can
that.
I just make a
Sure, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to make a quick point that, I mean, this is a perfect example of what I'm speaking about. The Nation newspaper is essentially the leading newspaper in Barbados simply because it's the one that sells the most papers. And, it has outlived one of the other printing, The Advocate, we can call this name. It appears that they are publishing. Certainly, they seem to be more robust than the Advocate is, and for that reason, they understand what people want to see. And Colville, you're defending it, but the reality is that I know the Nation has conducted extensive research on what people want to see on the front page, and essentially gives the people what they want. And people may criticize and say we prefer you to put something in the front other than something else, but in the final analysis, clearly you have called it right in the sense that you put these things on the front page that will make people buy a paper, and they want to see it. And human interest stories are always important, but ultimately I think that your editors seem to have been pretty much spot on regarding knowing what people want to see up front on a newspaper, and that's the reason why you've been around for such a long time and you're doing so well now.
Anybody
Well, I would
else?
dare say that. I would dare say it's a little more than. Go ahead, Bro.
I want to lift this above just the Nation. I just call it editorial discretion. For some people, if it bleeds, it leads. One day the dog bites the man, the next day the man bites the dog, and I don't know that you could put that on one media host. I'm sure everybody has. When different editors come on different days, their emphasis is different depending on what their view is. Like somebody may prefer entertainment versus crime or versus politics. I don't know that it is fair to put to blanket it across a publication to say that you have this. I mean, we all have our agendas, whether print or otherwise, but at the end of the day, to me, that comes down strictly to editorial discretion, and editorial discretion, the discretion of whichever the editor is on at the particular time.
So the question is, how do we move past these things, or can we, in a small society like Barbados? Editorial discretion, if that's what you want to call it. Many of you mentioned the concept of gatekeepers. Political influence, which we know is rampant here in Barbados when it comes to the media. I think it was Ryan who talked about, or was it Colville, talking about stories that never see we've heard instances where there have been businesses that they felt they weren't portrayed in a good light, and they've reached out to media houses and said, I want this person moved, or I won't advertise with you. Things like this have been the reality. Can we, as a small island state, move past these things to be able to truly do investigative pieces?
Can we move past it? I would say yes. Will we move past it? I do not know. That's the gospel truth. Because at the end of the day, as you said, the affiliations and the ties are very strong when it comes to some media houses. Some of us sit in offices with corporations, so it's never going to be something set against those. What I want to say is that COVID was actually a blessing in disguise when it comes to the media in Barbados. Because for a long time, people call for the investigative journalism. People are always saying the journalists in Barbados get this wrong or they get that wrong. And then when COVID came and they saw the times when a press conference was called, the media was supposed to be on, the media wasn't there to ask questions. The Zoom wasn't working. They saw us ask questions. They saw the persons taking the questions, looking around like, we don't want to take this question. Next question, I'll get back to you. Never get back to you. They saw us asking the pertinent questions, asking one question 600 different ways just to get an answer, because they realized that the same thing we talked about earlier, Colville mentioned it, when it comes to access, Raya mentioned it, how the questions are answered, if the questions are ever answered. So COVID was that thing that finally humanized journalism in Barbados when it comes to the public. And so when you say if we'll ever get past the gatekeeping, honestly, COVID and social media is that thing that's helping us. So even as recently as when you had a press conference to address the cost of flights when it came to public servants, when it comes to the government, the cost of flights, that's a question that a journalist might have asked, and you might get told, oh, we got to do it because if we're not there, Barbados isn't represented. However, when the public came and the public was all on social media about it, they were on the call-in programs and everything, all of a sudden it became, let me address this. And that's where I agree with Manny on the Public Information Act, because that's something that you should never have to be reactionary about. If a trip is planned, there is no reason why an itinerary is not sent out. There's not a reason why an itinerary is not posted someplace, or we already know that when these persons travel, they're going to be here, there, and everywhere. You compare us to the US, when Joe Biden is leaving, we know where he's going, we know how long he's going to be at Fort whatever, we know when he's going to be leaving. So you want to compare us to them, and you want to pick and choose which things you give us. But if you're going to give us some of it, give us the best of it. And so for me, yes, we can move past, but it's a matter of how quickly and who really wants us to move past.
All right, can the Freedom of Information Act truly exist in a place like Barbados without having something like freedom of speech on the books as well? We'll look at that and a lot more when we come back. Stay with us. This evening, we're taking a look at the role of journalism in our new republic. And we were talking generally about the Freedom of Information Act and how important something like that would be, seeing an act like that enacted. But in truth and fact, will just having an act like that even make any inroads without having freedom of speech, without having things like, if we're looking to our North American neighbors, whistleblower legislation, for example, where we can have people who are protected if they disclose any information without fear of reprisal for their disclosures. How important is it for us to have a suite of acts or legislation that fully allows not only the public, but people who are might be encumbered by commercial influence based on their jobs and so on, to be able to freely share information? How important is it to not only have the Freedom of Information Act, but a suite of things really to support it?
Very important. So I would say that right now we have freedom of speech enshrined in the Constitution. So we guarantee freedom of speech in the Constitution. So, but coming back to the whole issue of a small society where everybody knows everybody, it is a matter of who. But we can move past this, but the time is another problem. When will we move past it? I see the new generation of journalists having more, are more brave, are more aggressive and assertive. So maybe I might not be alive when we get to move past this, but we can move past it. Nothing is impossible. We just have to keep chipping away at it. We have just to keep going at it so that we can reach a point at least where we can feel reasonably comfortable that we are getting somewhere with respect to our role as journalists in informing people, shaping opinions, keeping public servants and government to their feet to the fire. And also, I just have to go back to a point that was made about someone calling about the nation. It also begs the question as to the role that we have to play. We are expected to be everything for everybody. And it's a heavy responsibility on our shoulders because everybody wants a piece of us. Everybody has a perspective on what we should be and what we should not be. So given that responsibility, then therefore people should bear in mind that they need therefore to treat us with more respect so that, and we can work together. You know, there's no reason why it should be the us and them, but we are all in this together in respect of a democracy. A real functional democracy is not anything that can really work properly without the media, without a robust and active media. And a judge in the United States, he said, and this is a very said, democracy behind closed doors dies. Democracy dies behind closed doors.
All right. So, I mean, we can go on and on talking about legislation, and I have a totally different view of freedom of speech. When we talk about true freedom of speech and the whole idea of libel and defamation and the laws that go along with it, I don't think that we are truly free to speak our minds for whatever reason, to speak our piece because of, the way generally things are set up. So, in the interest of time, charting a way forward, I'm going to go to you first, Ryan. How do we go forward from here as a grouping, media workers, journalists?
Before I get to that one, just to respond really quickly to what you just said, because if you're talking about North American context, the burden is different when it comes to defamation. Here, you say something about somebody, you gotta prove that thing is true, or out there, the burden is actually on the person that you are saying the thing about. And I kind of prefer our system, to be quite honest. I think that even especially with what's happening with social media, we can't just say anything about anybody, because once an allegation goes out there, whether or not it is true, the stain is already on the person. And I think that's where we have to be careful. So kind of to segue into my comment now, when it comes to social media especially, I think that the traditional media has retreated from its where it should be when it comes to social media. We're the authority. The truth is, and we're where the truth is. And without traditional media, those who would portend to be some, I guess, armchair journalists or on about different things, they can't really function. They can't really exist, because we bring legitimacy to what they do. And I think that that's something that I would like to see. I would like to see traditional media houses be more assertive in terms of what their role is, or our role is, vis-a-vis social media. It's not just a free-for-all, because I think, especially now, the Barbados Broadcasting Authority, their campaign shows it, that think before you click. There's so many things that fly around out there online now. Some things purport to be in Barbados are not even in Barbados. And, people seize on these things. I remember very recently somebody had sent me something which I think that, to do with the QEH, that there was a shooting at the QEH. And, it's very easy when you, especially when you want to be first. And I think that's the pressure that traditional media has been feeling. When you want to be first, and then you trying to play catch up. If you were to take your role more seriously as traditional media, or our role more seriously as traditional media, forget about the speed, concentrate more on the accuracy, and then that trust that Peter was just talking about, that trust builds in the public, so that they don't say, oh no, man, they always get it wrong, or they always come with half these stories. And I think that's where we really need to get.
All right, I think there definitely are some areas that we need to work on, and I know personally when it comes to matters of national interest, sometimes because of the channels that we have to go through, I feel like I'm out of red tape. Sometimes I feel like my red tape has run out, and that's it for me. But I mean, we really have no choice, where in instances you have to wait on an official announcement, where as journalists you're trying to be timely. Yes, you want to make sure that you're credible, but by the time you announce it, it's long gone, and maybe the chance has gone to be timely in the announcement of what's happening or to pursue whatever story. We're going to take a final break here, and when we come back, charting the way forward in nice bite sizes, succinct sizes from the rest of our panel. That's next. Stay with us. Welcome back to the People's Business. Definitely has gone by so quickly. Let's go to you, Colville. What's the role of the media? What's the role of journalism in this new republic?
Well, in the role of journalism in this new republic, it has not changed. Basically, pre going republic, it still remains constant, which is to firstly ensure that our citizens can have the information to make responsible and informed decisions. So that role has not changed. Basically, it takes on a particular importance in as we we transition into being a republic, especially as we look at constitutional reform, as we look at law reform, these things that we are now looking to take on within the context of a republic. You have various competing interests and agendas looking to have their interests within those changes. The media is the only homogeneous entity that can provide context and information that encompasses all of those entities that want their interests represented. So the public can therefore choose better as to what exactly they want the Republic of Barbados to look like in this era. And this is something that we have to take quite seriously going forward. And it brings me back also to the caller's perspective and the caller's point about what is on the front page of what they consider national importance. One also has to be reminded that part of the task of the media also is to set the national discourse as well. That also is our agenda. We sometimes drive the national discourse, and that's pretty much my perspective.
Peter, let's hear from you.
Yeah, a couple of quick things. I mean, I agree that we need a Freedom of Information Act. That's easy. I do also think that we need public sector reform. The public sector of Barbados has this opinion that it is an entity unto itself and that it's not working on behalf of the people of Barbados. And I think in many instances, you call the ministry and you will ask questions which an agent will tell you they cannot give you the response to, when in truth and in fact, there's nothing legally stopping them from doing that. You were talking about statistics before. There's nothing that stops an agency from giving you the statistics that you ask for, because if they're collecting that data, they're holding it on your behalf. The challenge is that they may not feel like doing it, or they alternatively may not feel that they could do it. And I think that there has to be some level of a cultural re-education within the public service as to what their role is, and for them to understand, but ultimately they work for us. I think that the media, because of the limited resources, has to be willing to co-opt professionals. I am a political consultant, and I do work media work as part of that. And I think that there is a space for persons who are professional economists to do media work. There's a space for persons who are medical doctors to do media work. And I think that there has to be roles carved out for persons who the media cannot afford to pay, quite frankly, to be able to do and to share that kind of load as part of the journalist enterprise. And I think that's something that can work well in Barbados. And then this one is for the Media Association of Barbados. And I'm not sure, Emanuel, what your role is in relation to that. But I think the media associations, not only in Barbados, across the region, have to become more active. They have to be in a position to carry issues. I commend you for trying to put on a debate in the last by-election. It's something that the media associations in the OACS have not been able to do. But certainly, this is the kind of activism that the Media Association of Barbados has to be engaged in. And I think it has to be strengthened to a point where it can carry causes on behalf of journalists that face difficulties, and also essentially be representing the interests of the public, in trying to ensure that we have a balanced media organization. But that, sadly, is something that we also don't have. So those are some of my ideas on what we can do to get journalism moving in the right direction.
Emanuel, the role of BARJAM moving forward, or any umbrella body that deals with media and journalists.
Right. So first of all, I think going forward that we need to recognize that journalists need to be better paid for the work they're doing. They have a million jobs to do and they don't get paid enough for it. The perception, the cultural reform in the public service, like what Peter was saying, people working for you, and they feel that when you call for information, it's like their own personal home that they're running, and they don't want to give you the information. And I think that too, going forward, that we need the judiciary to be freed up in the sense that we can report in this modern 21st century without just having to write notes. You can't even record in the courts anymore. BARJAM have put forward a proposal to the present AG, and it made it circulation. I don't know what's become of that right now, so that we can actually record for accuracy in the courts of Barbados and even do video recordings. I mean, this is the modern world, okay? So those, for the sake of time, those are some of the things I like to see going forward.
All right, and we absolutely are out of time. It's been a quick 1 hour. I think it went quicker than an hour. I want to thank all of you for sharing with us. It's a good start to the conversation, and we definitely have to continue. Thank you so much joining us this evening. Emanuel Joseph, Ryan Broome, Kerrie Gooding, Colville Mounsey, and Peter Wickham. On behalf of the entire team, I'm TESHIA HINDS.